Founder and CEO.
Hi, and welcome to another episode of How to Sell Drugs, a podcast about drug culture, policy, and business with an emphasis on harm reduction. This is intended for educational purposes only, and today we are joined by Ben Witte, founder and CEO of Recess, which we're actually consuming right now. Thank you for bringing the samples.
Yeah, my pleasure. It's great to be here.
Thanks. So, for those who may not be familiar with you or Recess, would you kind of do a brief description of your background and how you got here?
So, thanks again for having me. So, a bit about my background. I grew up in Southern California in a little beach town. I was kind of a surfer and a creative in high school. I was really into making movies specifically, but art and design broadly. And thought I was going to study film in college, but ended up studying business. I'm 31, and so I graduated in 2010, right when kind of Silicon Valley was emerging and kind of the startup culture there, and always kind of and was attracted to kind of what was happening there, and so decided I wanted to graduate and work for a startup. My first job out of college was a three-person startup called True Anthem, and we were building an influencer marketing platform in social media. So it was one of these things that was like the right idea at the wrong time and wrong execution. Like we launched on MySpace to give you a sense of where the world was. But it was a great first experience because in the very early days of kind of social media kind of emerging, I got to really think about how brands were building themselves online in a social media driven world. And additionally, kind of what a startup was and what mistakes not to make, frankly. From there, I joined another kind of marketing technology company called AdRoll, which kind of pioneered retargeted ads. It was a different type of experience. I was there from 10 people to something like 600 to 700 people. Had a bunch of interesting roles in the company. But kind of always knew I wanted to start my own company and always knew my kind of passions and strengths were more around kind of consumer experiences. And I kind of just ended up in advertising technology by accident. It wasn't very of a deliberate choice. And so kind of quit my job one day and kind of set out on my own. Before I started working on Recess, I was working on a different idea, which was actually like a hotel concept, which I won't spend too much time on. But decided to table that. And, long story short, I moved to New York about 2 years ago and joined two friends actually at a firm called Life Capital. And the idea was to incubate businesses and invest in businesses. And that's where I came up with the idea for Recess. I had heard about CBD, and I've kind of always been a naturally kind of wired, hyper anxious, ADD person. And so when I heard about CBD, I started using it on myself to see if it helped me feel kind of more balanced, more even keeled throughout my day. And when I started using it regularly, I found it to be very effective, and I felt better. And the way I describe the experience is just feeling more calm, better able to, adapt to the daily stresses that life kind of throws at you. And I really viewed it as like kind of a productivity enhancer, which was like one of those a key insight for Recess, which was like, I thought everyone was getting the positioning of the ingredient wrong. But through that experience, just had like a number of basic insights. The first was like, I'm not the only one that feels this way. Feeling kind of overwhelmed, off-center by modern day society, whether it's due to technology or politics or news or you name it. There's clearly something going on, which kind of inspired one of our taglines, an antidote to modern times. And the second insight was that the compound CBD itself was very interesting to me, but the applications to date were clearly not it. Oils, tinctures, gummies, vaporizers were not very mainstream, in my opinion. And consuming CBD in an oil form just was obviously not a great user experience. Like people are not going to walk around with like a jar of CBD oil in their bag and put a couple drops into their tongue multiple times a day. I don't think that's great. But the way to think about CBD is a compound no different than like caffeine or whey protein. And that the value is going to be created by like infusing it in the right type of formulations. Like an obvious one is like a ready to drink beverage and creating kind of the brand and positioning of on top of it. And just like, Red Bull didn't focus on marketing caffeine and taurine, they focused on Red Bull gives you wings, and they don't call it the caffeine category. They call it the energy category. The way to view CBD was like a compound that enabled a feeling, right? And so that was like also a key insight. The third was that, basically I looked at the beverage, and it was one of these things that never even occurred to me to look at CPG or like a beverage or the beverage space to start a company in. But the more time kind of spent looking at it, was like a couple things. Like the first is like, this is the most brand driven category on the planet due to the frequency of kind of use and purchase. Yet no one's actually very good at marketing anymore. And that even the most successful recent beverage companies succeeded despite being not great at marketing, in my opinion.
What would be some examples?
Like LaCroix. Like LaCroix is a name, not a brand. Like it doesn't
Sure.
stand for anything. There's no like clear mission or purpose behind it. I think the same could be said about the coconut water companies or the kombucha companies. Like they're solid brands, but no one is actually building brands anymore like Red Bull did, like Coca-Cola did, like Gatorade did.
So what does Recess tell people about you as a consumer of Recess? What do people get? What does that signal, or what is the intention?
In terms of like the value proposition or like what the brand stands for?
Well, both what the brand stands for, but also I guess I'm interested also in like badge value, right? Like,
Yeah.
People like Starbucks is one of these things where like people have their Starbucks and that says, I don't know what it's supposed to say, but to me it says like I've got my shit together enough that I was able to spend extra time getting to work because I had to wait in line for a long time.
I think there's like, before I get to that question, I mean, the way I think about the brand is just like Red Bull focused on kind of the action sports community to create the association with having a Red Bull and getting stimulated, and Gatorade focused on professional athletics to create the association with having a Gatorade and getting that kind of fitness recovery value proposition. We're focused on creatives. So music, fashion, art, design, internet culture is kind of the communities like we are integrating into and kind of cultivating. And I think the brand is very much meant to be, is I buy creatives for creatives brand. I look at Recess as like a design company in many ways. And so I think when you're holding a Recess, I think there's like a thoughtfulness to it. Like I look at why Recess is working is it's like a complete thought. Like every component of the user experience kind of works together to like deliver our mission. Like I don't look at Recess as a beverage company. I don't remotely look at us as a CBD company. I think Recess is like a new type of consumer wellness brand. We create products like this sparkling water and experiences like, so far, like our website, our Instagram, Recess IRL, our retail experience, all the events we do. And they are of equal importance. It's not like the Instagram exists just to sell this drink. Like it's a product in its own right. And that's kind of where we're going. But they work together like to, deliver on our mission, which is to help people feel balanced, centered, and inspired so they can be their most productive and creative self despite an increasingly stressful world. And so I wanted to use this sparkling water to establish the idea of having a Recess. But there are many Recess or types of Recess we're going to create moving forward. Some you consume in your body, others you consume in your mind.
Can you elaborate on what kind of Recess I would consume in my mind?
I think like I would like, one thing that's inspired our Instagram strategy and content and general vibe was like, I've tried to meditate like off and on for years, like using Headspace and Calm, and
So boring.
I know, so boring, and it never really stuck with me, right? But for me, meditation is like sitting on my couch, listening to music, thinking, right? It's more of using like creativity and like various visual and different types of sensual experiences to help me like get to a certain state. And so you could see us creating many types of digital experiences, which are interesting in many different ways and potentially effective, right? I think the only other brands that have like a similar mission to us are like Calm and Headspace, even though they're very different. But we're using, I think that, a key insight is that like this product and this platform that we're building and beverage in general is one of the best, types of businesses to create other businesses on top of, because again of the frequency of use and purchase. Like we can go invest in like lots of interesting things that we don't need to monetize. Like,
so that sounds to me, I want to explore the idea of an antidote to modern times, but in some ways it's almost like an anti-Red Bull that you're describing. So Red Bull being a fast-moving consumer packaged good that they then leveraged into becoming a media company, which is all about adrenaline. And it almost sounds like you're doing the counterpoint to that, in that yours is all about relaxation, not necessarily to the point of being super sedated and comatose, but just relaxing.
I think that's actually a key. So one of the things I say is that one of the things you'll notice is we've never used the word relax ever in any copy.
Oh, sorry about that.
No, I know. No, it's like, but it's an important. So like the thinking is, it's like, it's of course like that's the general word you could use to use it, but we specifically don't use that word because what we're focused on is like balance.
Sure.
And like, which I think is different than relaxation. The way I think about this is like, no one actually aspires to relax. Like if you tell someone to relax, that's kind of an insult, right?
Right.
What you aspire to do is feel like balanced, feel even keeled, feel calm, cool, collected, which is our tagline, which is like, I think the right medium of both these things, right? And so the idea is like, I really view Recess like a productivity company in many ways. And the idea is like, you can't be creative or productive if you're stressed out, anxious, or overly stimulated. Take a recess to reset and rebalance so you can get into that kind of state of flow, so to speak.
So it's interesting that you say flow because that's what I was thinking about. It seems like that's where you guys and Red Bull could potentially meet in the middle because all these extreme sports are designed, so I understand. I'm not an extreme sport guy. I'm not brave enough, but they enter the state of flow because they have to be so focused on the task at hand, and that's kind of the sensation that a lot of these athletes are thinking. But meditation and all these things are other routes to achieving that flow state. That reminds me of that book. Was it something about superhuman in the title?
Yeah.
It's about the flow state.
Oh, I know you're talking about. I know you're talking about.
Yeah. Well, we'll follow up and try to figure out the exact title. But so in antidote to modern times, and you came across this through your own personal experimentation, which is interesting. That's what we see a lot of entrepreneurs in the space doing. I mean, it's what we've done with Lucy, is creating a product to solve a problem that you have yourself. Can you describe what you were thinking or how you felt when you experienced CBD in the way that you imagined probably everybody else should?
Well, fast starting today, the joke I say is like, I wouldn't have been able to start Recess without Recess itself, right? And so, when I first started experimenting with CBD, what I felt was, again, more balanced, more even keeled, and better able to like adapt to the daily stresses that life throws at you. I think CBD is the next caffeine, but it's very different than caffeine in the sense that it doesn't have this like immediate like stimulation effect, which I think the subtlety of CBD is its biggest strength, which is probably what most people don't think. But like, I just noticed that when I started using it regularly, as well as adaptogenic herbs, which are also included in Recess, it's not just hemp extract. I just was less generally anxious, right? And like I was better, like, it's at that time I was like really searching for what I wanted to do with my life. And at the early stages of Recess, or starting the company, like it was stressful, and I think taking CBD regularly made me less stressed. But again, the word I like to use is like balance, and I think that's what I felt.
Interesting. And so, did you consume caffeine?
Yeah.
Or do you consume caffeine?
Yes. I have an iced coffee every morning.
Gotcha.
And I usually, most afternoons I'll also have one. So I actually think CBD and caffeine works very well together. When I have a Recess and a nice coffee, I feel less jittery, and I think we're definitely going to explore that in the future, like CBD plus caffeine.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's kind of what you see with some of these caffeinated beverages using L-theanine as well.
Yeah, there's L-theanine in Recess too.
Oh, is there?
Yep.
So I got to be more cautious about what I'm putting into my body.
Yes,
Not that
really
I have any
should.
issues with these. It's just I trust you so implicitly. There it is, L-theanine. You're right. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the business side of things. So you were at Life Capital, was it?
Yeah, that was
okay, and then you were having something like a mid-late 20s existential crisis,
for sure,
self-medicating with CBD, and thought, why doesn't everybody do this? And how did you go about formulating, raising capital, getting to the place where you are now? And I'm gonna cut you off before you get all the way to where you are today, but how did you get started?
Yeah, it was pretty crazy. I literally had no idea how this beverage industry worked or how to make a beverage. the first thing we did was, even before we started working on the product, we started working on the brand at the same time, interestingly. And so
That makes sense.
yeah, no. So it was like, the idea was like CBD sparkling water. That was it.
Did you like LaCroix or any of these?
Yeah,
I mean,
I think
sparkling waters?
they were for sure like inspired like that. And it was we could have added it to any type of drink in theory, right? Could have been CBD kombucha, could have been CBD anything, but
Yeah,
we found sparkling water is like the fastest, what makes sense right now.
It's a good category.
Yep.
I mean, it's definitely something you could put stuff into. We sometimes joke around the office because as a nicotine gum, we say, why would you ever chew regular gum?
Yeah,
you
yeah,
could
exactly.
have some extra
yeah,
stuff
functional,
in there.
yeah.
Anyways,
But anyways, that's besides the point. So literally went on Google and searched like beverage formulator. Originally hired this major company that like worked with Starbucks and like Dr. Pepper. That's like a formulation company.
sure.
And after about 2 weeks, I decided that this is not for me. I want to be like in the lab.
You didn't sign a contract?
Yeah, we
that
did sign a
forced you?
contract, and that's actually
You just
something
wrote
that's
it
happened.
off?
No, just wrote it off. There's been a couple things that have happened like that throughout the history of Recess, where it's like, if it's not feeling right,
Just
I'm gonna write it off.
guts to cut
Yeah,
kind of thing.
yeah.
Wow.
It's
Okay.
happened a couple times.
Wow.
And let them go. Had done some work on the brand in the early days with Gin Lane. I worked with Gin Lane on establishing like the brand identity. So we came out with a name and some of the initial concept for the packaging, and they helped me focus on like the essence of, I'd say, like the brand positioning. But again, the brand got ahead of the product because we started both at the same time.
Sure.
And long story short, I met through a friend, someone up in the Hudson Valley who basically created, like, he had a business creating syrup, so you'd add to like cocktails and like sparkling water, like a flavored syrup.
Wow,
And I'm like,
okay.
you know how to make flavors? Like, do you want to work on this drink with me?
Sure.
And so I went up to Beacon, New York, every weekend by myself for 8 months, and I created Recess with him.
How far away?
It's like a 2-hour train there.
Gotcha.
And so we just hacked. Like, at the early days, there was no, even back then, there was no concept of water-soluble CBD, right? So I started out by calling hemp farms in Kentucky. I'm like, how do you oil doesn't dissolve in water, so we have to use something else.
Sure.
And there's been so much innovation over time on the ingredient itself and all the applications that are obvious fits for it. We ended up, I talked to every, person in the space and ended up founding a great partner there. But we just hacked on this. I barely did any user testing before we launched.
So, I'm very familiar with product formulation because of Soylent and Lucy and all these things. And, one of the kind of amusing stories that lots of like founders like to reminisce about is how when you're going through this process that you have to try so many different things because you're trying to increase your throughput.
Yes.
So you're trying to try all these things. Did you ever get to a point where you took so much CBD that you thought maybe this is too much CBD?
No. Not real. Actually, no. I've never felt like I've taken too much CBD, and I probably drink like 6-7 Recess a day. But I will say that, like, formulating is very interesting because it's like a puzzle. Like, I had like 5 like key attributes I was like optimizing for. I wanted to be fortified. I want to obviously taste amazing and like deliver the intended effect. That's the meta point. But I wanted to be 4 to 5 grams of sugar, shelf stable, at a certain price point. Like the unit economics had to work.
Sure.
I think those are the main.
And
3
4 to 5 grams of sugar is simply because you don't want to go too much above that, just because that'd be too much sugar.
I wanted to feel guilt-free, where you could drink a couple of them a day, but I don't think that has to be 0. I think guilt-free was like what I was optimizing for.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, people put sugar in their coffee, that kind of thing. There's a certain amount of sugar that is cost of doing business in this world.
Yes. But I think the funniest part is, like, we got, like, literally, I think a month before we launched, we got like the nutrition facts back, and it was like 10 grams of sugar, and I was like, this is like, I feel strongly about this. Like, we had to be like in the 4 to 5 gram, and we basically redesigned the entire process and came up with a key innovation in how recess is made, which I won't describe.
Oh, come
But
on. You can't say that.
there's a reason it tastes like sweeter than it does. But because of like,
Are there any kind of sweeteners or
no,
anything like that?
it's all from, there's a tiny bit of added sugar, but it's all from the fruit itself.
Interesting.
There's none of that like fake sugar, these brands that say they have 0 grams of sugar, but it's like using one of those ingredients.
Yeah. Oh, it's
But
that's
anyway,
awesome.
it's like formulation's interesting.
Yeah, it's a huge pain, very important. I mean, all the business aspects are always a huge pain. But so meanwhile, while you're making these trips to Beacon, you're also working with Gin Lane, which is a
Yeah, very
marketing agency based in New York City, which is known to have a very positive reputation. Also known to potentially be expensive.
Mhm.
So, did you raise money in order to talk to them? Did you put in personal savings or?
So I worked with Gin. So yes, we put in a little bit of money at the beginning. The partners in Life Capital and I, personally, and we didn't raise any outside capital. And that was for the initial like developing the brand identity. And then what happened is that again the brand got ahead of the product, and so I paused working with Gin Lane to finish the product because I didn't have any packaging to design.
Sure.
And by that time, it made sense to go in a different direction. And I found 2 friends that now live here, Ryan Harmon and Spencer Madsen, who were freelancers at the time, and now have an agency called Day Job. But we worked together on the brand and the brand positioning. And then I worked with another group called The Couch on the website user experience. So I'm very involved in the brand, and both were very, very young, kind of 2 were freelancers or 2 very, very young agencies, like where I was like the first client, effectively.
Sure.
Which I think is actually something I think is important. I think like finding undervalued talent is like probably the most important thing in a startup, in my opinion.
Yeah, well, I mean, finding undervalued everything because you're super capital constrained.
Yeah.
That's super interesting. Okay, that makes a lot of sense. And then,
one more on the team. I'm just while we're talking about it. I brought on and a guy who's an advisor. Who the only guy I knew that worked in CPG was this guy named Simon, who had been kind of spent 25 years like kind of in general management. CPG, was CEO of a nutrition bar company that he actually sold before joining Recess. And when I was ready to commercialize the product and kind of go into production, so to speak, and think about manufacturing and launching the business, he came on as our COO. So it was Simon and I, and then some freelancers until we launched. And so we launched exactly 6.5 months ago, and it was me in my apartment and Simon in Boise, Idaho, when we launched.
That's awesome. And you guys had a very successful launch, and you guys are in a lot of locations in New York. And you guys also have one of the things that I saw about you in the press was you guys have a really interesting kind of concept retail experience. What made you decide to go that route so quickly? I mean, you've only been launched for 6 months. You're already doing kind of concept pop-up retail experience. What drove that?
Well, my intention from day one was always to be as omnichannel as possible, is what I like to say. I think the right distribution strategy for beverage, due to, again, the fact that it's a daily habit product, like I think people are drinking Recess like they have coffee, and so the right distribution strategy is to make that product available everywhere eventually.
Sure.
I purposely only launched kind of online off of our own website for 2 reasons. The first is that I wanted consumers' first interaction with our brand to be the website and our Instagram, because that's what kind of conveys the emotion, the mission, the purpose, and the feeling of the brand. The first line on the website and the first line on the back of the can is like, we canned a feeling, right? And that's what I actually think we're in the business of, like creating feelings. And when you drink a Recess, like the perceived effect of drinking it is a combination of like the efficacy of the functional ingredients and how they interact with you individually. But arguably equally importantly is your expectation about what they're going to do to you and your intention, which derives from like the brand and the messaging that we deliver, right? And I think that's another key insight here is like we don't market the ingredient, we market the solution. Everyone else in CBD is like slapping CBD on the label and it's selling now because we're in a CBD mania, but ultimately it's just going to fade to the back and it's going to be like, I really believe in like the jobs to be done framework. Consumers hire a brand to do a job, right? And especially when you're, selling a feeling, so to speak, like how you position and talk about it's very important. So anyways, that was the first reason why I wanted consumers' first interaction with the brand to be our website. The second was that I wanted to kind of create the buzz, the leverage and the buzz to go offline. So I purposely launched in New York and not California for a couple of different reasons. The first is that I wanted to establish the recess, even though I'm from California. Conventional wisdom was like launch recess in California, right? But I think I wanted to establish the brand outside of the kind of marijuana echo chamber, so to speak, and not be labeled a cannabis company. And I look at recess as like, a consumer wellness brand. And, I know a lot of cannabis companies will refer to themselves as that. But I think it's important to kind of separate yourself from that. And the second is that I think New York's just the best place to launch consumer products and brands because, because of its, how condensed it is, it's very easy to get like velocity. And I think it's where kind of culture is created today. And so, I wanted New York City to be our first kind of offline market. And then look, it just kind of, it just exploded. We did like 40 times our first month's projected sales. We had, 4,000 back orders after, 30, 45 days. And
So how did you deal with the back order situation?
it was kind of a disaster, right? We were working with a very small co-packer, and who on purpose, who just wasn't able to keep up. And we just had to very quickly, basically and he was a partner in the business. That was another key decision we did, where we didn't just like outsource to like a third party co-packer who was just like, he had an equity stake in the business. He was a real partner in the business, which ended up working out very well when shit hit the fan in a positive way.
Yeah.
But he had an incentive to
super
go
motivated
all in.
to keep working.
And so it was just figuring out how to scale our capacity and production as fast as possible. And that's kind of been it over the past, 6.5 months.
Okay. So retail space.
Oh, retail space.
Why?
Sorry. It goes back to that idea of like, I think we're really marketing a feeling. And I wanted to create an experience in New York that felt like you were walking into our Instagram, that felt like you were walking into the feeling that I want you to feel when you drink a can of Recess, right? So that was the first reason. It was just like a branded experience. The second was that I wanted to kind of create a space where people could come like take a recess. So in the back area, there's kind of the store is almost like divided in half. In the front, you have refrigerators, and we do sampling. You can buy recess in the back as this like kind of it feels like you're in like a James Turrell like art exhibit, but it's like all this like dim blue lighting, and we like invented these chairs which you can lay on in a number of different ways, and people during the day come back there and kind of chill out, take a recess from the crazy day in New York. And then the most important reason is for these events we do. We do 3 to 4 events a week with various kind of brand partners and creative partners. We've done everything from kind of painting workshops to ASMR exhibits to Bumble mixers to panels, like you name it. We're doing IRL events. And so we're trying to create experiences for people to come like get out of their own head, so to speak. So the reason we did the store is purely because of marketing. I don't really care about the sales from it, even though they were much better than I thought they would be. But the real reason is like the branded experience that it creates, and our ability to work and collaborate with various partners.
Got it. Yeah, that's super interesting. And that makes a ton of sense because you see companies like Casper opening up stores so that people can try out the product because it's relatively, compared to a can of Recess, an expensive product.
Yep.
And so you might have a certain class of consumers that wants to lie on the mattress before they purchase, and maybe that's kind of your next opportunity for growth to access those customers. But for a fast-moving consumer product, it seems like it's got to be more of a marketing cost. And the only thing that I would wish to understand, although I might know the answer before I ask, is how do you decide whether the marketing expense is worth it? Because you can't really attribute too much of a lift from that marketing expenditure. So, how do you think about it yourself?
I think you have to just appreciate this category is like very unique compared to other like D2C categories, right? And the fact that, again, the goal is to sell people many recess a day, not one product a year, right? If you think about that, if you think about if you're running marketing for Casper, you're optimizing for someone buying a mattress every 10 years, right? I'm trying to drive people, because our strategy is to be omnichannel and that the recess is all around you. In New York City, we have close to 2,000 accounts already, retailers. So it's really all about brand awareness and keeping the brand top of mind. And so I haven't spent really any time like optimizing our funnel, anything like that. We have done no paid advertising, no influencer marketing. It's all around kind of content and experiences designed for people to engage deeply with and share. And so like the key metric for that I pay attention to, honestly, is the number of Instagram shares we get a day.
Sure.
Like, and I know Recess IRL is working because people are walking in there and taking incredible pictures of themselves, and people are taking pictures of the can, and like it's something you can feel, not measure. And so, I mean, you can measure some of these things like inbound wholesale, like your store velocity stuff, but like I really think for consumer brands, it's more of a feeling, like, and it's working when it is.
Sure. So that makes sense. I mean, because with the shares, you can back out a CPM based on what the reach of those Instagrams is to some extent. I don't know if you had a hurdle rate in mind when you launched the experience. It sounds like probably not, but certainly there is some amount of money that you would spend on this experience where you would say it's too much. So how do you?
I think that's fair. Like, so the first thing I did was only signed a 2-month lease, right?
Okay.
So it was an experiment. I literally woke up one morning and I was like, I think we should have like a space. Or taking a step back, at the time the company was based in my apartment. Right. And we were looking for an office.
Right.
And the original idea was like, okay, let's get a space. There's all this like empty retail in New York. We need an office, and I think a space that you could walk into that was like an art exhibit would be dope.
Sure.
So I called up my friend Fritz, who's 24 years old. He's like a carpenter and like knows how to make shit. And I was like, do you want to come look at space with me?
Cool.
And we started looking at space in like the East Village, and almost got close to one and decided no, and then took this space on Broadway and Great Jones. And the thinking on that was like, well, this is, at the very least, this is a billboard on Broadway. If you just looked at it as a billboard on Broadway, you could arguably justify the expense.
Another way to calculate the
exactly.
the CPM. Sure.
And it was like, the original plan was to have our office in the back, which is where that chill area is, and the retail part in the front. And it just started moving too fast. From like, we're not going to fit in here. and
so when did you launch that retail experience?
In February, like February 1st, so like 3 months after.
So you had a 2-month lease. Are you guys still there?
Yeah, we extended it because it's been working so well.
Got it.
And so now we're going to open Recess IRL in every city. So we're going to open one in LA when we launch here.
Nice. Well, is it going to be close to?
I think it'll be around here. Yeah, it's more the
good.
Recess vibe.
Don't do the West Side.
No, I'm definitely not doing the West Side.
It's too far to travel, and I want to be able to have a recess during my workday. That's awesome. Okay. So then, it sounds like expansion into other cities with your in real life location experiences will be important. Working to get the product to as many other. When you say accounts, I mean, what kind of are you talking about? Convenience? Are we talking about a grocery store?
Yeah.
How does that all work?
So the most interesting learning from Recess to date is that people drink Recess at every waking hour of the day. There's some people that drink it when they get up in the morning to start their day calm. There's others that drink it before they go to bed. It works very well in kind of it was designed for between 10 a.m. and 4 p.m. as a kind of a productivity enhancer use case. If you really like study the brand positioning, it's really focused on, that's the idea, is like creativity, taking Recess to enable creativity. It works at fast casual restaurants. It works as a substitute for your 2 o'clock coffee. It works people use it before they work out, after they work out. It works at a restaurant. It works at a bar as a substitute for alcohol. It works as a mixer. It's really interesting because it works literally everywhere. And most drinks are much more confined in terms of their relevant use cases, and as a result, their consumption occasions. Like, you're not going to sell coconut water at a bar. Doesn't really make a lot of sense, right? But Recess works there. So it's a long way of saying is like we want to be everywhere, and over time you could see us developing specific SKUs for specific use cases. So you could see again like a Recess which includes caffeine. Like I think cold brew coffee plus CBD is really interesting. You could see one designed specifically before bed. You could see a specific mixer designed. Like, and so like Recess is like this meta idea, and I think there's many different, as I've shared, like many different kind of recesses to continue to create over time. Yeah.
Got it. And so have you, since launching, gone any period of time in which you have not consumed Recess or CBD?
No. Yeah, not more than a day.
More
Right,
than
not more than a few days.
Would you be pissed off if you ended up going on some weekend trip and then you discovered that you were fresh out?
That actually happened this past weekend. Yeah, I was with my family, and my mom was supposed to bring some, and because I flew from New York, and it didn't work out. So,
Okay.
but like I would say, no, it's interesting. Like I think you develop like this. It really, again, it's different than like caffeine, where it's very like an acute effect. It's more of this like I think your body maintains what's really interacting with is like your endocannabinoid system, which is like a nervous system which helps your body kind of maintain equilibrium and homeostasis. And I think it like the more regularly you consume it, the stronger that becomes, right?
Sure.
And so I think it does last a while.
Got it. So you feel like you've been doing a good job alleviating chronic stress so that you might have a higher stress tolerance in the short term, and then you can go back to your regimen if you find. Yeah, that I can understand that. I guess let's talk about why people are so stressed for a second. When you say antidote to modern times, balanced, centered, inspired, that makes sense. I would probably want to be that all of the time anyway. But antidote to modern times, what about modern times is so stressful from your perspective?
I think it's just like the rate of change happening in the world that we like aren't like naturally in a position to like be able to comprehend and deal with. In many ways, I think it's not as crazy as we think it is, and a lot of it is in our head. But I think it's a confluence of factors. I think a primary one is technology and our phones specifically, and all of the kind of second order effects that they create in terms of our expectations, are always seeking kind of dopamine hits, are comparing ourselves to others because of social media, how news has transformed, all of these things. I think that's kind of the main factor.
Do you have any other personal habits aside from drinking Recess that you utilize to try to alleviate that?
I mean, again, I like to spend a lot of time. I like to spend a decent amount of time by myself, like thinking. Like I honestly like my meditation practice is like sitting in my apartment, like pacing around sometimes, like thinking, listening to music.
Sure.
And so it's not trying to turn off my mind, but it's just trying to like take a step back sometimes and like think about what's happening in my life and what's happening in the world. And so like it's important to me that I have that time.
Sure.
So that's like an example of something.
That
I also
sense.
think like creating is important. In many ways, I think Recess is like about the creative process itself. Like that's what the brand is about, and we're going to do a lot of interesting things in terms of like decentralizing the brand, which I can speak to. But like, I think it's important to not just consume, but to create, and like play a role in society. Like I honestly believe that. And like I think so much of the time, because of social media, we're just scrolling the entire time instead of adding interesting things to it. Hopefully it's not just selfies, but
Sure.
I think creating is another way I deal with it.
Got it. And so when you said you could speak more to the decentralization, it sounds almost like crypto to me. What are you talking about?
No, it's not that. It's like more like this idea that like Recess, we're really focused on the design community. Like I wanted, when I was building the brand, I was like, the person I wanted to speak to first was like a creative director, a graphic designer. Like that was like my initial like micro audience. And as a result of that focus, and like I think the brand and the company, we have like a big following in the design community, and we think it's an interesting opportunity. And people already are remixing the brand in many ways. They're doing interesting photo shoots with the can. They're creating interesting digital content. I've seen interesting paintings that having to do with the idea of recess. We get tagged in pictures all the time of someone seeing recess colors in the real world, like graphic design. So we're gonna create our website's gonna become much more of a kind of an editorial experience, kind of a creative, for the creative community. And you're gonna be able to download our entire all of our brand assets and guidelines and kind of create recess content if you would like to yourself, and kind of we would feature it. And we think there's an interesting idea there to kind of double down on our community.
Got it. And it sounds like, and forgive any creatives who I may be labeling unfairly, but there is a stereotype of the creative or the artist throughout history as being particularly interested or willing to self-experiment using all sorts of chemicals. And how does that play into recess? I mean, you mentioned that recess kind of almost goes well with anything. And obviously CBD is typically or historically consumed alongside THC. So how do you feel about THC personally? Do you use it if you feel comfortable sharing? Is that a future product direction? And then I want to talk about potential other drugs beyond that when you finish answering.
I'm very open-minded to drugs. I do use THC. Recess will highly unlikely will ever touch it.
Why?
Because it's just two different businesses. It's, you start with distribution. Recess is designed to be sold in Target, Whole Foods, etc. I don't see THC products being sold there anytime soon. And so I look at them
10 years from now?
Potentially 10 years from now. But until they're, THC is able to be sold everywhere, I think it's unlikely. And I think they're two different but equally interesting opportunities. I happen to think CBD is going to be much bigger than THC for one simple reason. Not everyone wants to be stoned all the time, but everyone wants to feel calm all the time.
Sure.
It's just a bigger addressable market. But if I could, I probably would experiment with it. I think of what recess is doing. There's really not that many things in the world that make you feel something, right? You have alcohol, you have drugs of very compounds that are referred to as drugs of many kinds. And I think there's this interesting space emerging of nootropics, hemp extracts of various forms, botanicals, adaptogens, and even digital experiences that I think people are starting to play with to optimize their mentality. And I think we're in day one of that, right? And I think there's going to be many, many more innovations here. And I think, frankly, I created this formula, and I'm not a scientist. I don't even approach this from a biohacker standpoint.
Sure.
But we're going to be investing a lot more in this on both formulations of various forms. Because I think, again, we're in day one of that.
Early days, certainly, yeah. And so, how do you guys feel about either personally or potentially from a brand standpoint about some of these other drugs that are now starting to gain more mainstream acceptance? An example would be the decriminalization of psilocybin in Denver, and recently, maybe even today, proposed in Oakland. What does that make you think about?
I'm very supportive of that, and I think I've benefited from experiences, and I think it can help a lot of other people too. And I think it's different than something like CBD. I think all these things are different compounds that should be regulated differently. I think it would probably be a mistake to just make psilocybin available in a CVS, right?
Sure.
But I think it's definitely something we should figure out how to make available to others safely and regulate, and also understand specifically how we can develop specific formulations for specific issues that people are having.
Got it. So it sounds like on the spectrum of prohibition, you're saying these things should be pushed
yes, for
to
sure.
some extent in the opposite direction.
Yeah.
What about, do you feel like that for all drugs? I mean, what about cocaine? Should cocaine be decriminalized?
Probably not.
Okay.
I haven't spent too much time thinking but I wouldn't
Sure.
consider myself like a full-on libertarian, let people do everything they want to do. I think certain things are, you know, I don't think you get addicted to psilocybin like
Sure.
you would to cocaine,
Sure.
right? That's an important factor.
Yeah, I don't think we see that. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's not something you want to just do every day,
Hmm.
right? But I think it is an experience that people should be able to have at key inflection points in their life,
Hmm.
or on a regular basis. But I think something like cocaine or meth or opioids, due to their, due to their, you know, addictive qualities, should be not as easily accessible.
Sure. That makes sense. And then when you talk about how you are now going to start looking at different SKUs, different potential formulations of recess, how do you deal with or interact with appropriately the community that you guys have done a great job cultivating and supporting, but like all communities, there's not going to be 100% agreement
Mm-hmm.
all of the time, and so you must have people who email you or shout at you from different social media platforms. You guys should make a keto version or
Yeah.
whatever version. How
Yep.
do you take all that feedback into consideration?
Yeah. We definitely get it. Some people want zero sugar. It's like, of course, I'd love to. I'm going to make a zero sugar product. It's just a question of when. We've done a few posts that are like solicit ideas for new flavors,
Yeah.
and we'll definitely incorporate these ideas into the next flavors we'll roll out,
Uh-huh.
which we're about to kind of begin the process of launching some new flavors.
I
Um,
want 25 milligrams of hemp protein in here.
that could be one, as like the protein, the fitness
Sure.
skew. Like, but I don't know. Like, I'm more of the, again, like, I don't really believe that much in user insights. I think it's I'm not sure. Like,
It's a very Steve Jobs approach.
yeah, I think yeah, we'll see where we go. There hasn't been much to date. I don't really think in like demographics and like on marketing, for example. I don't really think in like demographics and psychographics. I think in like,
But you did think about sparkling water as a growth industry.
it's true, but like, again, because I just designed something I wanted. To be honest with you, like,
Sure.
like it's just like I wanted something that tasted like, kind of like a sparkling tea kombucha, but also sparkling, right? Like, I
Sure.
designed something that I thought tasted good that others would too, and that's how I think about the brand. I think if you try and like do too much user testing, you end up in the middle, which is where you never want to be in the middle, in my opinion. Like,
Mhm.
you end in just the brand ends up standing for nothing.
Mhm.
If you ask people what they want, you kind of gotta tell people what they want
Sure.
sometimes
Sure.
because they don't know what they want.
I mean, you did say that you wanted to cater to the sort of creative directors of
Mhm.
the world. Is that? Did you have an informal focus group based on your network, or how did you know that you were achieving that?
I think
'Cause I think
I
you
think
have.
Instagram, and I know you just like I like in the early days, and I still follow. Like, look at everyone that follows you, like on Instagram. Like,
Mhm.
you'll learn so much about like who your audience and your customers are, and the people that care enough about your brand to share it,
Sure.
right? And so that's how I knew it was working. Is like
Mhm.
Instagram.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I definitely had, focusing on creatives was, made sense for a couple different reasons. First, it's like who I think I knew the best, like because it was like a lot of my friends, right? Like, I think design brands for yourself is usually more effective than trying to design something for someone you can't relate to at all.
Sure.
The second was that like I thought it was like a community that was like super high leverage and high influence in Instagram, but no one is really speaking to them in an effective way,
Mm-hmm.
right? And the third is that like given like the value proposition that we're kind of marketing, this idea of like getting into a flow state so you can be productive and creative, if you want to focus on like enabling people to be productive and creative, you want to probably focus your content on people that are by definition productive and creative. Like, if you're a creator that makes music, that creates art, that designs things, that's an architect, etc., you're by definition productive and creative in my eyes, right? And so just like an athlete is to Gatorade, right?
Sure.
And so that was kind of the thinking.
And then do you have brands that you look towards for inspiration, or perhaps
Yeah.
more easily put, brands that you think are doing a good job within their lanes?
Yeah. My favorite brand and I think the best marketer on the planet right now is Virgil Abloh from Off-White.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's been really
Not wearing off-whites.
no, I don't wear. I don't.
In
I've never
fact,
actually bought any Off-White,
those-
ironically, because I'm an entrepreneur.
They're too expensive. Is
yeah.
that the point?
But yeah, I think he does an amazing job at like he's always creating. Like the guy creates more than anyone I think on the planet right now. He's kind of cultivated like a creative collective of kind of partners. He's publishing the process on social media. It's very kind of global and like city driven. It's very kind of drop and collection driven. He's DJing. He's making clothes. He's making art. He's making furniture. Very multidisciplinary. So he is someone, and that's a brand that I really admire.
You should reach out to him.
I know I haven't. I should. I will.
Well, I'm sure he's watching the show. So, Virgil.
Hey, Virgil. I like this brand Best Made a lot, which is this kind of like high-end like outdoor gear, like designer like outdoor gear.
Okay.
And I love how they think about kind of creating kind of content and profiling different people in different places. I love Glossier. I think Glossier is an amazing brand in terms of the makeup company.
You use a bunch of their products?
I've never used their products, but I respect like how they've, again, I like brands that have like a very clear mission and purpose, a very clear kind of community they're speaking to, that focus on creating kind of end-to-end like omnichannel experiences, like how the digital and the physical like interact. Very kind of the intersection of like business and design and like innovating on your business model, and kind of cultivating a community that spreads organically. I think again, consumer brands are weird because like I think it's all, you should be optimizing for word of mouth. Like you like that's how the best consumer brands
Sure.
kind of grow the fastest. And yeah.
Got it. Those are some good examples.
Thank
I
you.
got to check out the apparel company that you mentioned.
Yeah.
Not a big outdoorsy person, but could always use some nice clothes.
You want like a really high-end designer axe. They're
Axe,
basically
the body
axe.
spray?
No, like an axe, like an actual axe you'd bring on a camping
They
trip.
have an
Yeah,
axe?
they're very cool.
Maybe for like, home security or
Yes,
something.
definitely.
I feel like the baseball bat is, so last century.
I agree.
Now we need the axe. Well, speaking of the axe, I think it's time to end the podcast. But Ben, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate you sharing your story, and we've got a lot of aspiring entrepreneurs who watch the show. So if you have any kind of parting words of advice in terms of how you got kind of the guts to go for it, or any advice that you would give someone about potentially starting their own company,
Yep.
maybe that would be a good place to leave it.
I think like the idea you focus on is very important, and I think too many people are like into like entrepreneurship for sport these days, and I think it's like everyone thinks it's like so easy to create like a direct to consumer brand and like come up with the 100th like deodorant, then create a cool brand identity around it. I don't think it's that easy. And so like what I like to tell people is like pay attention to what you pay attention to. Like what do you think about like when you're just thinking about what you want to think about? And those are these spaces you should explore. And I think that's like the idea matters a lot. And in order to find the right idea, it should be something that just like comes naturally to you, that doesn't even feel like work almost. And so that would be my advice.
That's great advice. Really appreciate it. Thanks, Ben, so much.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.